So it would be nice if they gave us a listing of what the unallowables are. This says expressly unallowable cost means a particular item or a type of cost which under the express provisions of applicable law, regulation, or contract is specifically named and stated to be unallowable. It would be very helpful if the government would just provide you a list of that, but they don't exactly do that. I've gone through and I pulled out what many of these are. You will find these in that list before you. I'll have a few of these. The government doesn't want to pay for your advertising. They don't want to pay for airfare travel costs in excess of the lowest available option. They're not going to pay first class when you travel. Certainly they don't want to pay for alcohol. Automobile costs for personal use, bad debts in your business, contingencies, contributions, donations, cost of promotional items. Well, some of these can slip into your cost if you don't have an accounting system that's set up to sort of catch these and parse them out, put them in a separate location so that you're not billing the government. When you get an audit, that's exactly what they're looking for, is to make sure that you're not somehow either slipping these in occasionally, or that you just have a policy carte blanche to just run these through all the time. You see the list here. I think some of the important ones, you are a startup company. Some of the startup costs are not going to be listed there. On the second page, hotel in excess of per diem. I'll talk about per diem in a minute. Excess or idle facilities. Facilities becomes part of your indirect rate. And if you're a startup company, a lot of times you have to buy more facility than you can actually, need, but you've got to buy things in chunks. Well, this is one of those reasonableness things that you're going to end up negotiating with the government on a contract, is maybe how much of that facility cost you can add to your indirect rates. So far, I haven't seen a lot of pushback. I don't think anybody in the research parks that I know of have had trouble with this, but I could see that could be an issue. They're not going to pay for reimbursing you for legal costs incurred to defend or pursue a claim with the government. Lobbying is a big one, and there are companies in the parks that do pay for lobbying. So we need an accounting system that pulls these costs aside and doesn't put them in the billing system. Memberships in social dining, country clubs, organizational costs. I think you kind of get some of an idea of what the government doesn't want to pay for. Finally, research and development expenses in excess of reasonable. If you are a startup company and you're fortunate enough to have investors putting money in your business, if they want to put in $2 million and say develop this, those costs are going into internal IR&D. So that becomes part of your G&A rate, essentially, and could get billed off to the government. Well, the government is probably going to come in and say, wait a minute, we are okay with paying some IR&D as part of your overhead rates, but maybe not to the extent of participating in a $2 million a year reimbursement to you, which was funded by your investors. I mentioned per diem. Per diem is how much the government's willing to pay you to go to certain cities and do certain things. And there's a quick and easy way to find out how much they're willing to pay. And so you go to this website at the General Services Administration and you find out what it costs. And then in your accounting, you can charge this as a direct cost. And you can charge, if it's not a direct cost, if you're just doing general marketing, you can put this in your sales and marketing travel expense category, for example. But the excess, the portion that is in excess of the allowed per diem, if there is any, need to go into the unallowable bucket. so that you don't bill the government for that. And one thing that companies sometimes forget, they understand that they're billing the government on the direct expenses, but they forget that they're also billing the government for indirect expenses. So a lot of companies may know that they need to follow the per diem when they're billing against a contract, but they forget or never think about the fact that they need to be doing this also for the indirect costs that are going into building up their rates. And it's important that you have a policy in your accounting that you won't overcharge even on your indirect G&A, sales and marketing, that you use the same policy for that. Okay, unallowable cost, what that really means is unbillable. Just because these are called unallowable by the government, that doesn't mean that you won't incur these costs. What it means is that you just have to segregate these costs. You put them in an accounting bucket that says unallowable, and you don't bill the government for them. So think about that for just a moment. When you set up your accounting system, you have to make sure that all these different categories have a spot to bill for both the portions that are allowable and the portions that are unallowable, if there's a portion at all that is allowable. So here's one of the pitfalls of unallowable expense. If you're an SBR company, you must be careful in incurring unallowable expenses because they normally result in losses. Let's make this as simple as possible. Let's say that you're an SBR company and that you have one contract, and because you have one contract over the period of 1 year, you're able to bill out all of your direct costs and all of your indirect costs to that one contract. That's about as simple as I can show. And then the government will allow you to have a small profit of maybe 3 to, if you're really lucky, 10% of whatever that contract was. In some cases, I've seen as low as 10% of a fee only on the labor performed for the contract. So it's highly negotiable that you get a very, very small amount of profit at the end. Okay, so when you run this whole cash flow through, the government's paying for everything plus a small piece of profit. So if you have unallawables in your company, let's say that you had a profit of $10,000, but then you paid lobbyists $15,000 during that year, you're going to be sort of like in excess. You're going to show a loss for the portion that your unallawables exceed your profit. So I like to use this analogy of the bungee jumper. The bungee cord is the length of your profit. And so you can see what happens if you jump longer than the length of your profit. It's going to be a bad result. I noticed that this guy here is cheering on. It looks like his hand is perpetually sort of in the grip of a beer can, like he can't quite pull it out. He looks like he's having a good time watching the other guy jump. Other unallowable pitfalls: not all agencies allow the same cost. NSF does not allow or reimburse for internal R&D. So here's your accounting system. You may be doing some DoD contracts, you may be doing some others, but if you have a couple of different ones, it can get kind of complicated when you figure the rates, because NSF will not reimburse for internal R&D. That means when you bill them, you don't include any of that internal R&D. Same thing with NIH. But if you read the DFARS for the defense, their regulation says that the agencies shall not restrict the company from billing portions of their IR&D so long as it generally fulfills some portion of the direct contracts that the agency is involved with. And they sort of take that pretty broadly. So I've not seen very much internal research and development that was not acceptable to DoD agencies. Generally, they accept billing for the internal research and development. So that's a good thing if you have investors that are putting into your company be part of your indirect rates, and portions of that can be billed off to the government as part of your indirect rates. It's a really nice thing that the DOT allows that other agencies do not necessarily allow.
Question.
Yes?
I guess I'm not understanding what internal R&D is.
Okay. Internal R&D is simply R&D that your company is doing that is not under contract.
So if NSF gives me a contract to research this, that's not internal R&D.
Right. That is contracted R&D.
If I'm over here going, this is an interesting problem, and I'm over here researching it, that's my internal R&D?
That's correct.
Okay.
So to make sure that everyone heard that from the other areas is to distinguish the difference between contract R&D, which is what the federal government would pay for under contract, and then internal R&D, which is what your company may be doing on its own to further, in general, the product that you're trying to develop. And it may, in some cases, the government may be funding portions of the product development, and your company may be funding some of it internally. So the contracted R&D is usually referred to as CRAD or contract R&D, and the internal is IRAD. The next thing I want to talk about is timekeeping, and when you're doing federal contracts, it's important to have a timekeeping system that meets requirements. I can't stress this enough. One of my additional words of wisdom would be this: you can either make time to keep time, or you can do time. You choose. You must have a written policy. All employees must be aware of the policy. The timekeeping must be recorded daily. And you must record all the time worked. I have the hardest time with this one, companies I work with. Sometimes they just want to record the time they're working on the contract that they have. But once you engage with the federal government and you have requirements for timekeeping, you have to record all of your time that you're working for that company, because they want to know how this, perhaps you're working 60 hours a week. Well, if you're working 60 hours a week and not all of that is on their project, then overheads need to be applied greater on something else other than theirs. So that's why they want to make sure that you record all time. It has to be done in ink, or it has to be on an electronic system. You sign the time card at the end of each work period, which for most people is like every 2 weeks. Supervisors are to sign and approve. Here's another one, and I run into this sometimes with folks who come from an academic area, but you're recording time based on the nature of your work, not on available funding. A lot of times a graduate student will have the idea, well, this particular agency is giving me a fellowship, so my time is just going against that. That's what's carrying my dinner for this whole semester. Well, that doesn't work at all when you get into corporate-based accounting for companies, which is requirements that we have to